So we're going to say what's going on, everyone. What's going on? Good evening. Good evening. I'm Dr. St. Rice, and welcome to another powerful episode of No More Hiding podcast. We're coming to you live on this Thursday, September the 19th, and we're excited about the conversation that we're about to have with the gentlemen that are on the discussion today. For those who are joining us for the first time, this is No More Hiding. We are every first and third Thursday at the same time, and we want to bring to you unfiltered conversation that aim to engage, educate, and empower. And we amplify the black male voices on critical issues facing our community. Tonight, we got a really good episode for you. It's titled Beyond the Badge, Black Officers Confronting Systemic Inequities. And we're going to dive deep into the complex world of law enforcement, examining some of those challenges that exist, right? We know that black men who are in law enforcement and our law enforcement officers of color, African American, and those of color minority, they deal with a lot of issues. They deal with a lot of triumphs and things that we don't see, right? And so we're going to talk about this issue, such as ongoing reform, police reform within the agency. I'm honored. First and foremost, to tell you that I'm so honored to have our two distinguished guests who are going to bring a wealth of experience and insight into our conversation. First, we have Lieutenant Ray Rice. He's a 25-year veteran of the St. Louis County Police Department and a member of the Board of Ethical Society Policing. Lieutenant Rice has served in numerous supervisory roles, including the commander of the Special Forces Unit and the Internal Affairs for St. Louis County. He's also an Air Force veteran and an adjunct professor in criminal justice with Lindenwood University. And I'm proud to call him my friend. And then we also have Sergeant Donnie Walters. He's a 22-year-old veteran with St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department, and he's also the current president of the Ethical Society of Policing. Sergeant Walters has an extensive experience in community policing, SWAT operation, and an academy instructor. He's also known for his work with crisis negotiation, de-escalating training. And I gotta say it, I'm gonna throw it out there. He's also a proud member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. And so both of our guests have been at the forefront of the efforts to address racial inequities within law enforcement while serving the community with this distinction. They embody the complex duality of being both black men and police officers in today's America. Tonight, we'll explore the barriers that the police reform has, and we're also going to talk about how they see the accountability and those things that are critical to the success of policing, especially from a black male perspective. To our listeners, we invite you to join these conversations. Your questions, your perspectives, your valuable insights are going to help us with this dialogue tonight. We also want you to share and join in when we're talking about some of those critical issues. Feel free to hit subscribe. Feel free to hit the like button. Feel free to join in on the chat, and we'll share your questions. We'll bring them onto the stage and have a conversation about this live. So, without further ado, I'm gonna say, fellas, how you doing tonight?
Doing good, doing good. How about
Thanks.
yourself?
Man, I can't complain at all. I'm so happy to have you all here, man. It's exciting to have you sitting at this table, this virtual table with me, and having this dialogue tonight. And we know that this is a critical issue in the St. Louis community and all abroad, right? And we talk about the issues that's related to being black and blue, right? And we heard a lot of conversations about that. But before we get started, I would like you to introduce yourselves to the audience and let them know who they're going to be listening to and learning from tonight. So, Lieutenant Rice, we're going to go by rank, fellas, not necessarily rank and as it relates to experience, but just do it by rank. Lieutenant Rice, you start with us, and then Sergeant Walters, you bring it up.
Well, he is the prez, so we don't, but I'll start. I know we were talking off camera about turning 50, and so I don't want to add more years to my age, but this is actually my 28th year. And
All right.
um, I started actually the academy right after turning 21 years old. So I've been doing this for a long time, and I'm also an adjunct professor at Lindenwood University, and recently started my own training and consulting for law enforcement in the areas of implicit bias, leadership, ethics. And so You know, I've tried to use, my experience and knowledge from both being a black male in America and from the side of law enforcement to try to make, I guess, to engage not only the community, but educate folks on the ways of how we can better do things to build bridges rather than tear them down. So thanks for having me.
Man, thank you for being here. I didn't know you had started that. I know we had some conversation about that. So you went on and made it happen. And I'm proud of you, man. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sarge, what's going on? Talk to us a little bit.
Yeah.
Introduce yourself to the world.
Sergeant Donnie Walters, president of the Ethical Society of Police. I'm also the national sergeant at arms for the National Association for Black Law Enforcement Officers. And I just do a lot in my community. I believe in the community. I just believe in engaging the community right after post Ferguson and the killing of Mike Brown. I was tasked with the creating the department's de-escalation program, which I have been the sole instructor for the past 10 years. I've created de-escalating from the job, which includes identifying those individuals who, when they retire, how to de-escalate from the job, how to move away from being a police officer. And so I've done a lot. I've done a lot. Many certifications in defensive tactics. Um, Currently getting in I don't want to say getting next to Ray and going to start helping on some teaching on that aspect as well. So I'm always learning.
Man, thank you so much for being here. And I must say that it was a pleasure meeting you, and having a dialogue when we were doing our pre-production conversations and just learning about the work that you're doing out there. And I believe that the audience is in for a really good conversation. So I'm gonna go ahead and jump in. Remember, audience, remember those who are joining us. Feel free to drop in your questions in the chat. We're gonna bring them on live. Your comments, your thoughts. We're gonna bring you into this dialogue. So if you have any questions, come on, let's talk a little bit. But fellas, so quick questions. How have you navigated situations where your professional role and your personal beliefs about reform might have been in conflict? And that's either one of you all can start that.
I'll let the press start this one.
I mean, honestly, it's about transparency. And I could say a lot of times Ray and I have had numerous conversations and numerous debates, since becoming the president of Ethical on the city side and Ray being on the county side. We've quite often come together and discuss things. We don't always see eye to eye, but we'll talk it out until we do. But the one thing that we can say with police reform, there has to be transparency, there has to be accountability. Those are the two major things in order to change policing as a whole. And it's not just on the uniform side, but it's on our civilian side as well.
And for me, I can't necessarily recall a time where I felt conflicted about the morality or the choice between what's right and towing the line. It obviously takes courage to cross what we have come to know as the thin blue line. But I've always, not just in law enforcement, just in general, from the upbringing of my parents, as long as you're on the right side of history or your decisions are guided by a sense of righteousness, I really can't have conflict in what it is that I'm confronted with.
Man, you know, I heard those key terms about accountability and transparency. What does that mean? What does that mean from the context of from your experience as very seasoned veterans in law enforcement?
Well, in terms of first starting with the transparency part of it is from an organizational aspect is making sure that trust is not lost when we're trying to hide or manipulate a situation that ultimately comes to light. And by doing so, we damage the reputation, the trust that the community has in us. So no matter how bad a situation might be, whether it's a police officer involved in an act of misconduct or gross abuse of power, um, the most important thing is to put it out there, get ahead of it, and then when it comes, time for accountability, leadership has to make the appropriate efforts to first determine if it was a mistake, if it was a hiring failure, and then how do we rectify the situation so it doesn't happen again. So those two have to be married in a way that um, the public continues to trust. Number one, the organization and the profession, but but the fact that when you say something, that is actually true and accurate, that goes a long way in terms of you know crime prevention. We can't, if we don't have the trust of the community we serve, we don't have their participation. And if you don't have their participation, you can't be very effective at crime prevention and holding not only yourselves accountable in terms of police officers, because you need people when they see something to say something. And that goes both ways. If police officers or citizens are encountering police officers that they feel as though they were mistreated, disrespected, or whatever that case may be, in order for us to do what we need to do so that it doesn't happen again, we need citizens to follow through with the complaint process and
Mhm.
seeing something and they say something.
I agree. And as an organization, it is our duty to speak up and speak out despite the color of their skin. And we have stood strong and spoke out when the individuals who decided to do things against those that look like us, and they didn't look like us, but we spoke strong about it. And even when we had the five individuals from Memphis,
Mhm.
you know, abuse their power, we still spoke strong about it because, as we say, we need the community.
Mhm.
And that's why I believe in engaging the community opposed to community engagement. There's a difference because when you engage the community, you're actually involved. You're actually talking to individuals and you're actually working with them and you're learning from them because we can't do our job without the community.
Mhm. That's true. So Ray knows this, that I've been a professor in criminal justice in one of my prior roles in higher education, and how we talk about that. We have this idea of community policing, right?
Right.
But a lot of times it's internal strategies that we consider to be to serve the community. But oftentimes those strategies fail because we don't take the time to engage the community and find out exactly what the needs are. How do they see the situation, the challenges that exist within the community that they live in, right? And so one of the questions that comes to mind for me is, we talk about the community, the engage in the community. Talk to me a little bit about the ethical society policing and how do they go about engaging the community.
How do we go about engaging the community is actually going out into the community. We are a very unique organization that's been around for well over 50 years. And one of the main things was taking what we learned from our community and then applying it to policing. I just today I talked to a citizen that gave me some information about troubles in her neighborhood. And so even though I'm no longer on the streets, it's still my job to get her the services that she needs. She felt comfortable enough to bring it to me. And here in the city, because again, we talk about city, county, but our policing styles and the issues that we have are about the same. But Ray is in the county, I'm in the city, so it's kind of
Mhm.
a line in between us. But we're here in the city when we have community events, I'm out there. I'm walking around. I work with local politicians. One politician in particular is Dr. Yolanda Yancey of the 10th Ward.
She's
Work
on here, by the way. Thank you for joining us in this conversation.
Yeah, I work with her quite often and in her community and even moving beyond that community. I've worked with all the persons. I've worked with former elected officials who now have moved on to bigger and better things. Joe Palm. I work with Ty Dennis, who is the creator of Clippers and Cops. I'm with him once a month, and we're having conversations with the community in the barbershop. And that's what I do. I do get out into the community. I look to figure out how can we talked about bridging the gap. I
Hmm.
don't believe in bridging the gap. I believe in filling in the gap so high that it's a mountain. So those that don't want to be a part of it, they may get tired and stop climbing the mountain. But those that want to be a part of it will continue to climb that mountain, because a bridge can be destroyed. When Ray retire, I retire, somebody can come behind and blow that bridge up. So we're working to fill in that gap. So you gotta dig to get us backwards. We gotta fall forward and not fall backwards.
And it really goes back to the founding of our organization when you think about what led those courageous officers in the 70s to come together and say, hey, we need to establish an organization that is, number one, strong. There's power in numbers,
Hmm.
and that can begin to address systemic issues not only in policing, but in the community. Because sometimes, or quite often, as Black people in our communities in America in general and in law enforcement, we have issues that are unique to us, to our community, that go either ignored, marginalized, or dismissed.
Hmm.
And so, as individuals, it's very difficult to affect the necessary change to see the progress that everybody wants to see. And so the establishing of an organization at its core value seeks to be that unified force to, number one, shed light on the issues that everybody wants to see championed in terms of police reform, community, the way that our communities are policed, and then the other aspect of when citizens say, where are all the good police officers? It takes a courageous person to cross the thin blue line, point out some corruption, mistreatment, or racism. And without the support of an organization like ours and the community, those types of individuals in policing are easily targeted and retaliated against. So the engagement has to be consistent, and it has to be more of a partnership so that we all have, in terms of this organization, Ethical Society of Police, and many of us who got into policing in the first place to make a difference, we have shared goals between the activist community, the
Hmm.
criminal justice reform elements, but we find ourselves being targeted just as those who are barriers to the progress that we also want to see. So the engagement has to be both ways, the consistency and the showing up when folks like Donnie, myself, or anybody else steps across the line, puts a target on their back and says, this is not right. And they're speaking truth to power, and they need the support from citizens and political affiliations and the business community as well.
Man, and that's so true. No, we got quite a few people chiming in. We want to say what's going on to Miss Heather Taylor. She's also a fighter for this cause, and so we. One of the things I think about, right, is the history of policing in this country, which began with slave catchers, and utilizing them as the legal arm of a systemic issue, that impacts our community. And I think from that point forward, it created this mistrust in our community there is this divide. But one of the things I'm hearing you talk about is your why. So I gotta ask that question. What's your why? Why are you so passionate about the work that you do, in law enforcement?
Well, I can say from my standpoint, growing up, I'm proud to say I grew up in the inner city.
Hmm.
If you know the city of St. Louis, I grew up on Cook and Whittier. It was a rough neighborhood. Back in the day, it used to be known as the Bloody Eighth.
Hmm.
And my why is because I lost family members to crime. So when I graduated the academy, I came out with a different mission. It wasn't so much, quite often we come out and we think we're going to prevent crime. No, it's about deterring crime. It's about showing the community a different face, a different look. And that's what it's about. And I take pride in showing them something different, being somebody different. It's quite funny. Just the other day, I was somewhere and some individuals came in and they fist bumped me and said, "What's up, Unc?" And so I'm known. Ty brought it out yesterday. He said, called the new word now the youngins are using is dunkles, and that's the daddy and uncle that a lot of these young men and young kids don't have. So
Mm.
I take pride in that and being able to fist bump somebody, that because I give them that respect.
Yeah.
I don't look down on them. I look because at some point I was that individual. And even when I mentor some of the younger officers, they always ask me, what can they do? And I always say, when somebody like you comes across your life, help them out, just like I'm helping you out.
Thank you for sharing that.
But my why is pretty similar to black officers that I come across, not just locally, but when I engage in these conversations in other jurisdictions in other states, is that by and large, most of us had negative experiences or encounters as youth with law enforcement. And the inspiration for joining the profession was to at least attempt to change it from the inside so that others in our community didn't suffer the same disrespect, corrupt practices that we encountered as youth. And so, unfortunately, it comes, 28 years later,
Mm.
that why seems to be somewhat delusional, because there's extreme forces that fight the change and the
Mm.
progress that we need to see. But uh, sure, with Donnie, I grew up. I just turned 50. I grew up in the height. I was a teen at the height of the gang crack wars in St. Louis. As a youth, driving Natural Bridge from Goodfella to my girlfriend's house in Bell Ridge, I was often stopped going and coming, written a ticket, car searched. Uh, I had my license suspended twice while I was in high school for no reason other than driving while black. And so it was those experiences that, coming back to St. Louis after spending 4 years active duty in the Air Force, that was the inspiration for joining the profession with the intent of being uh, a solution, or at least part of the solution of the things that I saw as a kid. um, and that's been somewhat of the driving force and the why and the passion for the past 28 years. So,
Man, that's it, And one of the things I'm thinking about is St. Louis has a unique governmental structure for it to be a city, right? And we're divided. We have a divided governmental structure where St. Louis City has its line, St. Louis County has its line, right? How does that impact policing and the type of impact that you'd like to have in this, in our city?
Well, here recently, we as an organization, and I say this as an organization, we've actually dove in head first into the political side of things, not only on the local level but the state level. Cause and again, like I say, me and Ray have a lot of conversations offline. We collaborate on a lot of different things, as well as with the board. But him and I particularly have conversations about we're getting into this. What do we want out of it? We know we had to learn the political aspect of things, so then we know how to ask for certain things, or better yet, how we know how to walk in and demand certain things, and utilizing their rules and their regulations, or should I say the laws that they put in place, paying attention to the policy, and really holding elected officials accountable. Putting they a lot of times put policy over people, and we're trying to say, no, you need to put people over policy. And the way we get that is by us getting involved and understanding and really going to the polls and voting. That's the
Mhm.
key thing. The other thing is going into these offices and not coming out with just a handshake and you give them a leaflet. No, I believe in giving them a phone book of things we need. So they got to read through it. They may pick out one thing, but that's one accomplishment. Then we come back with that same phone book and we keep pushing forward. So we have to, again, fill in that gap with the political side of things as well.
And when you talk about the structure in St. Louis, in particular St. Louis County, with
Mm-hmm.
all the various municipal governments and municipal police departments, I think it also creates accountability and empathy barriers. And for
Okay.
instance, so let's just use Clayton for instance, right? That is a centralized area of commerce that during the day there's various people that transverse, 170 into Clayton to do business for
Mm-hmm.
various reasons. And just in that small footprint, you have Clayton PD, Ladue, Olivet, and Overland. So, and just in that small footprint, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, in terms of accountability barriers, you have people that may not necessarily live in those jurisdictions that are doing business, working, traveling, transversing those communities. And if they encounter law enforcement and some level of mistreatment from law enforcement, they're not necessarily voters or the constituents of the politicians of those municipalities. So it's difficult for them to hold their political governments accountable for the bad actors on the police departments that work or patrol those areas. And in the same token, when I say empathy barriers, when you have people that you feel as though they don't have shared interests, they don't live in your community, it's easy to say to take a position of us versus them. So I don't really care how they feel or what they went through because they're not part of my community. So it creates those barriers to accountability and empathy that leads to good policing in a way that probably doesn't, you know, hasn't been duplicated in many areas. And that's a negative to that.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes and I know we throw out those words such as accountability and things of that nature, right? And I'm sure the people saying, "Oh man, for real, how are you really gonna hold people accountable when you don't have the power, right? You don't have the power to pin or actually, the power of the system, right? So how do we do that when we have those conversations and that's man, whatever, going with that for real."
It,
I
it,
think we get that quite often. I know Ray gets it. I know I get it. And it comes down to, like I said, it comes down to getting up, getting out, and voting. It comes down to going to your community meetings. I can go to I've been invited to quite a few community meetings in the city of St. Louis. Now I can go on the south side of Delmore, and it's at Bishop DeBerg High School, and I got almost 200 people there, and they're firing questions at me left and right. I can go north of Delmore, and I'll get maybe 10, 15, 20 tops. And that's what we got to change. That's the change. We got to get our local we got to get our local people to believe in local government and get up, get out and vote because their votes do count. I'm always constantly to those elected officials that I know, I'm saying, hey, what's the ongoing? We look at when Obama first decided to run for president, it
Hmm.
was commercials everywhere.
Yeah.
We had every rapper, every singer saying, get up, get out and vote. He got in. We didn't hear no more about it. It's
Mm.
like, hey, we got the win. We done. No, we have to understand when the waters are calm, we still got to continue to prepare. It's like port in the art of war. You still got to prepare for war.
Hmm.
So that is what we do as an organization. Even though we may not have anything pressing right now, we're still preparing. We're still pushing. This is where we get to the politicians and we say, hey, we need to change the policy. Like Ray was saying, in St. Louis County, there's so many municipalities that, yeah, you're right. You can act this way and this municipality get up before they catch you and go to this municipality. So if we come up with the system that prevents that by putting somebody that looks like myself or Ray or you on the board of discipline with the Missouri Post, who really understands how these people jump, then that would kind of stop some of those bad actors.
Hmm.
But we got to get involved. That is the biggest thing. We can't continue to say, it don't affect me. No, it does affect you. It affects your family. It affects your generations after generations.
Hmm.
Let me throw a caveat before we move further. When we use the terms people that look like us, we
Uh-huh.
understand that all skin folk ain't kinfolk.
Can't.
So so they don't necessarily have to look like us if they don't share our values, political ideology, so on and so forth, our life experiences. Um, but back to the unfortunate aspect of what I'll call the protest movement, right? Is there's always the necessity for direct action, right? We've seen that throughout history where you have to, at some point, people have to be able to, or there's a reason why people take to the streets in demonstration. But where we drop the ball as a community is that we don't take that direct action or that same energy and become strategic to the point where we realize, or that we can realize, the necessary changes at the legislative level that needs to happen from the energy that we had with the direct action. So, for instance, in the post Ferguson civil unrest and all those things, there were positives that came out of that through that direct action and through the political will of those who either were forced to begin to recognize things, or two, saw that they didn't want a repeat of these same things at some point down the line.
Mhm.
Um, Here we are 10 years later, and once the cameras are gone and things of that nature, there's no real desire to have the excitement from it. We still need to go to the polls. We still need to hold elected officials accountable, and we still need to look at legislative actions. Case in point, I can't remember the particular Senate bill that was passed that banned chokeholds and had a list of things in terms of police reform, um, under the guise of police reform, right? So, a lot of those things that were in that bill didn't necessarily get to the teeth of what would influence the necessary changes that really need to happen.
That was Senate
Most
Bill 353.
Okay.
Hmm.
Most police departments that were CLIA accredited or accredited by some agency had banned chokeholds prior to that bill being passed in the first place. But back to the accountability piece in terms of legislative action and what voters need to do. The Missouri Post, you mentioned Missouri Post, is the state licensing authority for police officers across the state. They're underfunded. They don't have the investigative arm to investigate citizen complaints or officer misconduct and gross and egregious acts of constitutional violations across the state. And whenever a police officer is allowed to resign under investigation or is even terminated, police departments are supposed to make notification to Missouri Post, but it's basically a voluntary basis because there are no enforceable sanctions for police departments who fail to make the appropriate notification. Those are some of the things that uh, somehow we need to get strategic with the energy from the direct action protest movement to the legislative actions in order to make sure that it doesn't matter whether or not Donnie is here, or you insert whatever name of chief of police or politician. Those things are long lasting, and begin to lay the groundwork for real change. And as long as we get caught up on the theatrical aspect of protest and not the strategic aspect, we won't see the progress that we really need to see.
Man,
Can I piggyback
go,
off of
go
that?
ahead. Go ahead.
Because Ray had spoke about the chokehold, and I want to go into further with Breonna Taylor's murder. They said it was the no knock warrant. let me say this, coming from the SWAT world and being involved in well over 1,000 search warrants, that was not a search warrant. That was some officers going to go and rob the dope man. Period. Point blank in the discussion. Breonna Taylor was murdered because they went to that house to rob the dope man. Why? I say that because it was at night.
Mm,
No agency, unless it's a homicide suspect that we need to get sleeping, will we execute a search warrant at night.
mm,
Secondly, if it's such a high profile individual that is violent, then you get the SWAT team. You don't get four individuals in jeans, t-shirts, and um, body armor to go and do a search warrant because you're saying this is a high profile search warrant. So the and again, it comes out later that these individuals were bad apples. It took
mm,
them to go to a whole nother agency and further investigation. And now we're looking at, okay, the no knock warrant wasn't the issue. They were there to rob that person. They were there to do a robbery under the color of law. Period, point blank in the discussion. So we need to not say, oh, it's the no knock warrant. No, they were there to do a robbery, and they were doing it under the color of law. And they went and got a search warrant, and it was a search warrant that they did not do any surveillance on, because had they done surveillance, they'd have found out that their target wasn't even there. He no
mm,
longer lived there. They did none of that. They went off an old address and said, oh, this is where he's at. So
mm.
let's put that out there. Breonna Taylor was murdered by individuals who were acting in the capacity of policing.
Mhm. Man, you all was dropping some nuggets, and the audience was they was letting you know, man, this real talk, And so once again, those who are joining us, thank you for being a part of No More Hiding podcast and just being a part of this conversation tonight. As you know, we're talking about Beyond the Badge, Black officers confronting systemic inequities, and so we invite you to share your questions. We invite you to join in this conversation with us. Send it to somebody. Say, hey, they're having some real dialogue tonight. So share with somebody. Let them know. Subscribe to our channel. Click like buttons. All that other good stuff. But we're gonna get back to the dialogue. So there's a question at hand here. It says, can you share an example of a time when you felt conflicted or challenged by the disparities in the systems you were tasked to uplift? So who want to join in with that question first?
Can you share an example of conflicted challenge by disparities in the system?
Mhm.
Um, I don't, like I said earlier, I haven't been conflicted because I've always stood on, or at least as I've maneuvered through this profession, I always saw it as something I did, not who I am, right? And so it's easy when you begin to look at yourself as a police officer and that represents who you are at the core of your being,
Mhm.
then you become disconnected with, or at least in my mind, disconnected with being rooted in your blackness and the life experiences that you had prior to this profession. And so I've been unable to be conflicted in that because this is not who I am, this is what I do. But I
Mhm.
can speak to why officers can find themselves conflicted and what leads to a code of silence that it has been called. And let me put it in perspective for your listeners. Aside from maybe combat arms types of jobs in the military, this is law enforcement is probably the only career field where individuals are charged or might be in a position to place themselves in harm's way to save or prevent the serious injury or death of a total stranger, and at the same time might find themselves reliant on a colleague to prevent themselves from being seriously injured or killed. And when you find yourself faced with the realities of your mortality, depends on someone that you work with. And that someone that you work with may have exhibited behaviors that conflict with your morality. And then you have to figure out, or at least be faced with the fact that if I snitch on this person, if I bring out the things that I have seen or witnessed, and it leads to some type of negative career impact for the individual that I might find myself one day having to depend on to survive, that is a very difficult position for most people to be in. And then you couple that with the fact that there's very few sustained, consistent support for police whistleblowers in the
Mm,
community. So not only do they not have the support internally, they don't have the support externally. And we're asking them to put their very lives on the line for doing what's right. It You should be able to understand why there is conflict in that position.
mm. Yeah.
And so that is what a lot of us, especially, imagine being the only one in a police department across the country. I mean, most police departments are under 50 police officers.
Hmm.
So you could be the only or two black officers on the entire police department witnessing racism, misconduct. And at the same time, these are the same people that you might need to come respond to the officer in need of aid, and it's you, and they see you as the enemy. That's a difficult position to be in.
Mm.
And just to kind of roll off of that as well, we've seen quite a few movies where they had that one officer working in the agency. There was an officer in up on the East Coast. I can't think. I believe she was in Washington D.C. and she stood up, and for that she was ousted. She was
Hmm.
blackballed. You
I
get
remember
that.
that. Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, you get that type. I had the pleasure of meeting her at a NABLEO conference, and she's come back and spoke before. And it's quite often it happens across the country. We just don't hear about it because there's not organizations like Ethical Society of Police. There's not organizations like NABLEO that speak up and speak out against this type of treatment and behavior.
Hmm.
I personally have not been conflicted because I believe on standing on that. And somebody just put in there because again, that's Sergeant Heather Taylor, my
Hmm.
cousin, and who I became president after her. She stood strong, 10 toes down when it was her that was being targeted. And she stood. She
Yeah.
stood strong.
Yeah. I
And
remember that.
she a lot of us stood with her in solidarity. We wasn't there in the courtroom and we should have been. I will say that sometimes we fail because we fail because we don't always come to the forefront. And her and I have had conversations, and people say, "Oh, I need help," and then we as an organization stand up, and they won't even stand with us.
Hmm.
I've said this before when I became a member of my fraternity and I work in the community. When I stand up, I don't need 100 police officers, but if I got 100 citizens
Hmm.
like yourself, Dr. Surf, I got a
Yeah.
100 citizens standing with me. That says a lot more. That says, oh wow, then we go back to those elected officials are looking at that's 100 votes.
Yeah.
Remember in X when they said that's a lot of power for one black
For
man to
one.
have?
Yep.
That's a
Exactly.
prime example.
Mm.
So when we stand up and we speak out, this is the reason why I was taught, and I can say I was taught from Heather to say, hey, you need the community to stand with you. You need the community to be behind you because that's who we're doing this for. That's who we're doing this on behalf of our community.
Yeah. That it's powerful. My mind is going back to just maybe a month or so ago, when we had Chief Troy Doyle, who I have a lot of respect for with Ferguson, and he stood when after Officer Travis Brown, who I've never had the chance to meet, but from what I've heard and all rights, he was just a really good brother. He still is a good brother, just really trying to serve his community. And he when Chief Doyle, when he stood there, and he called out the conflicts that happen in our community. And so I just want to bring that into this space for a little bit, fellas, talk to me about your perspective when you were not necessarily that situation, but just incidents such as this that happen in our community that create these that create this divide. Because we're here serving the Black community. I can think of another good friend who lost who lost his nephew, in St. Louis City, and so his nephew was a young law enforcement officer as well, and he ended up being killed in a neighborhood in the community that he grew up in. So how do we address those situations? What's this dialogue we need to have with the community? To be able to say, okay, wake up, kind of like if you think back Spike Lee, his movie Wake Up, so how would you address that?
Because it gets into the county, I'm gonna start because I know Ray got a lot to input on that.
Mhm.
First thing is I pride in positive policing and humanizing the badge.
Mm,
Again, as Ray said, we this is not who I am. This is not Donnie. A lot of times, just like we talked about, you say, hey, do you want to add Sergeant to the beginning of this? No, this is Donnie. My job is law enforcement. My
mm,
job is policing. Policing don't make me. I didn't get into policing to change my identity, to change who I was. I got into policing to show something different, to become that mentor that I didn't have when I was a young kid out on the street running around. So it's about humanizing the badge
mm.
and positive policing. That's the biggest thing. It's showing that there's a human side to law enforcement where
How
we
do we
don't
how do we get to this where the badge is dehumanized? What do you think created that this image, right? Like individuals. Now, I wasn't in law enforcement; I was in criminal justice.
Right.
And so where do we get this idea that the individuals that are wearing this uniform or anything different than anyone else who has to wear a uniform, anyone
be-
different than anyone else?
because the media puts those individuals who need this badge to be somebody to the forefront.
Mm,
You put individuals like the murderer of George Floyd. I don't want to say his name. He murdered George Floyd,
hmm
and his chest was proud. It showed when they do these type of things, they're showing this badge, and it's like you're not even taking the time and the consideration to say, hey, this person may be in distress. Eric Garner, this person is in distress. You're not even taking the time to say, hey, this is somebody's son, somebody's uncle, somebody's relative. Somebody loves this individual, even though you may not personally have a personal relationship with them. Somebody does. And so you have to, and when I taught at the academy, I used to tell them all the time, that's still somebody's child. That's still somebody's relative. So treat them with respect and treat them like the human beings that they are. These are not animals,
mm,
but you get the movies that perpetuate, oh, we out here patrolling the jungle. A
hmm
jungle. We could I trust and believe. I don't think it's enough police cars and ammunition to go riding through the jungle on.
hmm
But that's how they look at our urban community. When we look at the movies, they're black and brown. That's the jungle. It's never, other areas. So the media has perpetuated this dehumanization of the badge and those that wear the badge.
So let me cook for a minute on this one.
Go
Go ahead.
ahead. We knew you was chomping at the bit, so
Mhm.
go on and knock it out.
Uh, First, what what I would hope that people would somehow we can start this conversation in terms of everybody looks at everything and to a certain extent of how does it benefit me,
Mm,
and so for our community, if they ask themselves, would they rather have Donnie, Travis Brown, Ray Rice, or whoever responding to their situation in a time of need or vulnerability, or would they rather have Billy Bob? And so when you ask yourself that question, you can begin to stop deterring people that look like you, your cousins, your loved ones,
mhm,
from joining the profession to help us get to a point where we have critical mass that can affect the necessary progress that we need to see. Because Travis is your cousin. That's who you want in this uniform. And so when you have, and I have to, I really have to keep it 100. If I was to look at this profession now in terms of the challenges of not only internal and systemic racism, but the lack of support from my own community, it would be a difficult choice to actually do this all over again. And
Mhm.
that shouldn't be where we are. We should be seeking to encourage our cousins to take up this profession, because those are the ones we want to see respond in a time of need. Now, back to the accountability piece, right? Um, and how the community has a bigger role that they don't realize that they have. So you just named, uh, uh, you didn't name him, but Derek Chauvin,
Mhm.
Minneapolis,
Mhm.
Democratic ran police department, city or whatever, mayor who appointed the police chief. Um, Breonna Taylor, what was that? Nashville.
Mhm.
Okay,
Yeah,
Democratic
Kentucky.
mayor,
I think it was Kentucky.
Yeah, yeah,
Louisville, Kentucky.
Kentucky, Kentucky. Yes.
But Louisville, right? A large constituent enough for black voters to make a difference. What I'm getting at is that in these areas where we represent voting power and we have political leadership who have chiefs of police in positions that aren't doing a very good job of, number one, weeding those out before they join the profession that might one day uh, turn out to be a Derek Chauvin. And then those who are Derek Chauvins who have consistently shown a behavior that is rooted in racial tendencies or biases, and you don't do all that you need to do to get that person out of your police department. We see that happen. So there's a failure in leadership, in the accountability from a voter aspect, going to those mayors in those cities and saying, wait a minute, not only was it the officer who was dead wrong, Derek Chauvin, but who are all the people who knew that he had these behaviors and allowed him to stay employed? And when you keep going down the line or you going up the ladder, you have to hold all rungs of the police department accountable for hiring failures, failure to properly discipline, um, and all of those things that lead to these unfortunate scenarios where we find out that people had a past history that was predictable for them to do what they did. Case in point, Sonia Massey. The
Mhm.
individual that killed her had a history that the previous agency saw fit to terminate his employment, and he went to another police department. And that sheriff, fortunately, was held accountable, but should have been held accountable prior to that. Sonia Massey might still be alive today. This
Yes.
goes back to the whole Muni Shuffle thing, where I
Mhm.
talked about how in the state of Missouri, and this is similar in most states, where there's a there's no mandate that is enforceable with sanctions for police departments not notifying the state licensing body or a database to a future employer that would have the records to show that, wait a minute, this person quit prior to being terminated. And Florissant, right? The
Mhm.
recent case with the Florissant officer who would take nude pictures of those that he stopped on traffic stops.
Mhm.
To this date, we don't even know that person's name. They could be very well be employed at another police agency right now today, because Florissant simply said he no longer works here. But did Florissant go the extra steps to ensure that that person can no longer be employed as a police officer in the state of Missouri? Period. And
Period.
that is a question.
Yeah.
So these are all the things that it's not just incumbent on police and those organizations such as ours to be fighting this fight, because we can't do it alone. And as long as we keep treating those of us that share the same experiences, life experiences, and have the same goals as the enemy, the other side will continue to win.
Mm. I was, as you were talking, I was thinking about the hiring restrictions that are in place, right? But we know now that there's been some shifts. are supposedly shifts in what we consider to be the hiring criteria uh, because of number one, the low number of individuals who are applying in the first place. So how do you think that that's going to help support the hiring of more black and brown law enforcement officers?
Well, let me say, I because I was in recruiting for 5 years,
Okay.
and there were quite a few individuals that I assisted to get onto the job. They had a minor infraction as a juvenile that was on
Hmm.
their adult record, and but because the color of their skin, they were automatically denied. I'm fighting this in my own agency now to come up with a certain standard. What's the standard? Because some some individuals that I personally have ran that were caught doing things, and they're police today,
Hmm.
but they skin color is different.
Hmm.
But then we judge the minorities and women on a whole different level. When they go to do pre-screenings, we've had, because a young lady didn't know that they were coming to do her interview, so she answered the door in her house shoes, and she was denied because she in her own house. So it's
Hmm.
these type of things. So now we've turned the dial to where we're in this desperate need of quantity over quality.
Hmm.
But the quantity that we're getting is not a minority quantity. You're taking an individual, and to all our veterans, I love them to death. I was in the Army myself, but you're going to say an individual who's had 4 years of experience in the military that did a tour overseas is a better fit than a individual that grew up in the hood, because the mentality, they've seen the same thing. The only difference is one was shooting a gun at the enemy, the other one was just living in a battle zone.
Hmm.
So we got to stop trying to get quantity over quality. We need to go back to the quality. We need to, and that's why, with the Ethical Society Police, we came up with the pre-recruitment program that started many moons ago to help people become better test takers.
Hmm.
Because, Doc, you seen it in
Yeah.
school.
Hmm.
I asked about cursive handwriting, and they said they don't even teach that in school no more. They don't even have books. So there's a lot of the skill that's being lost, and then we're expecting them to go out here and get jobs. So that's kind of what I've seen.
Yeah. And I hate to sound like an alarmist, but law enforcement, in my mind, is at a critical stage and juncture where we find so many variables that are uh, deterrents for the next generation, even joining police departments, no matter what the jurisdiction is. And
Hmm.
so Donnie talked about the representation in the media in terms of negative contributing factors of why it would even make sense for anybody to choose to do this job in the first place.
Hmm.
Um, Systemic racism still is an issue. You have people that are gatekeepers in police departments, that folks that don't share their same life experiences are not given the same uh, or at least equal opportunity to not only employment but also uh, what's the promotions and
Hmm.
things of that nature. And I'm also can attest to that as being a victim. So as I stated, I had my license suspended twice before joining the military. And so at one point, when I initially applied for the county police department, it was around March, and I go in that time. It was just before emails and all that paper. There was a paper application, so I go in, I turn in the application.
Hmm.
Right, about 3 or 4 months passed. I didn't hear anything, and It was the Friday of one of my drill days. I was in the Air National Guard at the time. I transitioned from active duty to Air National Guard. I went down there in uniform to actually, I was like, I didn't know how the process worked. So I
Okay.
figured, all right, maybe the application got lost, or, I got to redo it every so often.
Hmm.
So I walk in and I had the intent of just actually getting another application. And there was a brother by the name of Keith Mayfield, was one of the recruitment officers at the time. And
Okay.
so as I was about to leave, he stopped me and asked, basically, let me talk to you for a minute. And so we went through the typical questions of why you want to be a police officer, this and that. Long story short, we get to a point where I say, well, I actually applied a few months ago. And he was like, hold on, let me go check. We usually keep applications on file for a year. So he goes to check, couldn't find my application. What
Hmm.
that told me is that the individual that initially reviewed my first application saw a list of traffic citations and traffic and driver's license suspensions, and immediately attributed that to a character flaw and tossed my application in the trash.
Mm.
Well, Keith Mayfield, a brother who understood that your traffic stops and your license being suspended was not necessarily representative of your character.
Hmm.
And so, had it not been for a person in that position as a gatekeeper to give me that opportunity, I wouldn't even be here. And so, there's so many other Black folks and other minorities that are facing those same things, and it may not necessarily be rooted in overt racism. It's
Hmm.
the lack of life experiences. So if as a white man, you're the person receiving the application and you take into consideration your own life experience, and you go, well, I've never been arrested, I've never had my license suspended. So you
Hmm.
begin to judge your life experiences, and then you eliminate those individuals from the process based on your limited perspective of the world, and let alone no knowledge of the Black experience. And so this is a question, or this is a topic of conversation that we as an organization, and I've had with prior chiefs, is that um, if every metric of statistics in the state of Missouri and across the country says that Black people are stopped more often, cited more often, searched more often, but less likely to find drugs and things of that nature of their counterparts,
Hmm.
then why are we using traffic stop data or traffic citations, warrant arrest for not paying traffic citations as a direct lineage to a character flaw, right?
Exactly.
And
Hmm.
so all of those things have been consistent barriers to us even gaining employment in law enforcement. So you couple that with a society that has gotten to the point where they have demonized law enforcement to the extent that we see on 24-hour cycles, Derek Chauvin's, Sonia Macy incidents, and that begins to misrepresent the whole. Um, we're at a critical mass point because less people are choosing, or the right people are choosing not to join the police department. And then you have the consistency of those who want the power, lust for the power, who are choosing to do this job, and you will have more incidents of that in the future. So it's a very dark future if we continue on along the lines that we continue on, by demonizing and not joining and partnering together, and affecting the positive progress that we really need to see.
You
Yeah,
know,
and I
go ahead. Go ahead,
and just
Sarge.
to piggyback, I was denied the first time with the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department, but somebody saw my work because again, I've always been in the community, and I was working with drug education for youth, and I was in a program and it's partnered with the police department, and it took a major, and she picked up the phone and called the chief, and next thing you know, I was in the class. So I'm similar to Ray's experience as well. I had some issues, but heck, who didn't? I had traffic. I was arrested for a fight in the school. So this is the reason why I fight so hard for individuals that come to me and ask me for assistance with getting on a job. And I feel bad when I can't help them, but I'm still fighting.
I was thinking back. I applied too for St. Louis City and never got a call.
See?
And I
Yep.
remember, what's his name, brother out of U City. He was with St. Louis City. Oh man, what is his name? Tall, light skinned brother. He was at St. Louis City. He retired. He went into advocacy as well, and so it had come to me. But
Reddick.
Reddick, yeah, brother Reddick. I remember him having a conversation at that time. So me and a couple friends we applied. I think none of us got called, So, but there was a question. It says, "Who sets a vetting process for officers?"
And that the vetting process in St. Louis City, that's a great question.
Hmm.
And I'm gonna sit here and say I spent 5 years in recruiting. I've got certifications in background investigation and all of that. And I've yet to get, I can't even answer that for the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department. The vetting process, we have no clue because
Uh,
each chief brings about a different ideology or a different idea about how they vet.
mhm.
And I'm questioning it. And I have been questioning it as the president of ethical since I've been the president. And me and Heather have had conversations. We've had to go and fight. And I've been told, well, Donnie, all you got to do is let us know that's your person. Why do I got to let you know it's my person?
Exactly.
If
Hmm.
everybody's equal and everybody's being vetted the same, and I have found that they're not being vetted the same because I had an individual apply and they told him that he was denied because he hadn't paid his taxes for the previous year. I said, hell, I ain't paid my taxes for the previous year. So he paid the taxes, and then they said, oh, well, you got this now. So this was a different investigator. So the vetting process is so flawed, and I've shown that, but yet nobody wants to take ownership of it. They're
Mm.
saying it's the police department, they're saying it's Department of Personnel. So who is responsible for the vetting process? I don't even know.
Ray, what you think, LT?
Well, I'm a proponent of backup checks and balances because anytime you have individuals in a position to where they have the sole power or responsibility to determine whether or not somebody is fit to be a viable candidate in any form of employment, let alone the police department, that is a problem. So um, I think vetting processes, obviously across the profession, we can do a better job. Number one, I don't think that law enforcement by and large does a good job in determining whether or not applicants have a predisposition or some innate biases about particular groups of people that
Okay.
would influence their police decisions. And
Mhm.
so aside from whether or not they had traffic warrants or didn't pay their taxes, when you if we aren't determining whether or not someone is led by biases in their police decisions or
Mhm.
potentially are led by biases to make police decisions, then that is a gross negligence in my perspective. And so that's number one. And then number two, as I stated, where if we have people in these positions that are evaluating whether or not someone is even a viable candidate to proceed through the process, because we have to understand that even before the chief or command staff members or even the HR uh, leadership sees the applicant application, there is a person at the front end who is looking strictly at the application and determining whether or not that person is a viable candidate to proceed through the process.
Mhm.
And so without uh, proper checks and balances to determine whether or not there's disparities that are happening at every level of the hiring process, then That's something that needs to be addressed. So there's a lot of work to be done. When the question says who sets the vetting process, that comes back to citizens utilizing their voice in a constructive way to pressure political leadership who appointed the police chiefs to do a better job in that area that they want to see. And so it's all education, and that's part of what our organization does is an educational process for those who don't know. In order to be effective at anything that you do or seek to try to accomplish, you got to know what is, how do you do that? How do you get what you want to see? And
Mhm.
so those are some of the things that I think the public needs to be more engaged. If we're saying, like I said, if the community is saying that policing is all fucked up, I'm sorry, can we curse on this?
You good?
I knew it was coming.
Man, I've been holding, swallowing these curse
I
words.
knew it was coming.
It, you got to take some ownership in why it's that way,
Mhm.
right? Um, and so that's what needs to happen. It's not who does it. We all do it. We all have a say. Is that we aren't paying attention is what's going on
And then the
until
other
something
thing,
happens, until a
right?
tragedy happens, right?
And to piggyback off of that, we're getting to tech. We're getting into technology so much so that now you can submit your application online. So you submit your application online. You go and take a test. You in with a group. So you take the physical fitness test, then you take the written test, then you take your oral board. That's the only time somebody actually talks to you and they're asking you questions and checking the box, see if you answer the question. You answer it correctly, then you go to a psychological evaluation, and that's a 10 to 15-minute deal. And then next thing you know, you're in the academy class and nobody's really got to know you. When I was a recruiter, I took pride in talking to people, getting to
Mhm.
know people. Even with this pre-academy class, and one of my students is on here that I've been fighting for, but he took his story and he pled his case. I believed him. I fight hard. I'm still fighting for him. But it take a outside agency such as Jefferson County to accept him in the academy, but we're not accepting him in our own academy, and
Mhm.
he's able to get a post license. So those are the things that's discouraging, but that's what our organization, I'm still screaming to the top of my lungs because this brother is a real good brother and got the passion to be a police officer.
Man, you all have shared some really great nuggets, and we got some questions in the chat, but we're almost out of time. One of the things I was thinking about is, and uh, Harris Store is doing some good work, right? They're trying to change the narrative with the academy that's led by Dr. Nikki Brown and under the leadership of Dr. President Latanya Collins Smith, right? How do you think organizations? How do you think efforts such as that to create those police academies connected to our historically black colleges and university? Lincoln also has one, although we know that Lincoln serves, actually the student population probably has more whites students than it does African Americans simply because of where it's situated within our state. But how do you think efforts such as that, creating those academies that provide entryways into the criminal justice field, how do you think that's going to support?
The the academies such as because with the St. Louis City and St. Louis County, we're requiring at least 1,200 plus hours of academy training. The
Okay.
state of Missouri, in order to get a post certification, you only have to have 600 hours to get to sit for the post board and become a police officer. 600. St. Louis City, St. Louis County requires 1,200. It's a little bit longer. It's a little bit more entailed. So nothing against the other academies, nothing at all, because they are opening a door that was once closed to individuals like Robert Blaylock, and I'm gonna put his name out there. It's now he's now his passion is to become a police officer, and I think he's going to be a great police officer. But because, like Ray said, the gatekeepers of St. Louis City and St. Louis County are not giving him that opportunity based off of whatever their reason is. Now he's seeking to still become a police officer, and he's still fighting to become a police officer. So that opened up a doorway. So hopefully those individuals go into these academies, become successful, get out, work, and then still apply to the other agencies under mentorship. Because I'm still going to mentor him,
Hmm.
even while he's not in our academy. I'm going to mentor him. So when he comes out, I'm going to make sure he stays on the right path. So he's either going to be a St. Louis City police officer after he gets his experience, or a St. Louis County police officer, because he is, along with a lot of other ones that went through our pre-academy program, that are definitely important to our community. They deserve to be in the community. They should be in the community. And myself, my board, Ray, the board in the county, this is what we're fighting to do, is get those individuals their opportunities. Because right now, Ray and I got to train our replacements. We have to start training our replacements.
Um, you mentioned Harris Stowe, and I think anytime an organization or a group of people can cultivate the future of law enforcement in a way that they're connected to the community that they will serve is a positive. And what I would hope to see is that more of the partnerships were to occur, whether it's between organizations like ESOP, Better Family Life, Urban League, where we're partnering to get more people of like mind, like life experiences into the profession, so that our cousins are the ones who are showing up when we dial 911 versus uh, Billy Bob is an important aspect of what the future in law enforcement should look like, especially as the challenges progress and continue. So, and not just in St. Louis, that I think that needs to happen across the country, is the cultivation of officers and being connected to the community in a way so that they have those, or at least an installation of those values, and learn that they have the support, that it's okay for this to be what you do versus who you are. I think that's key.
And
Man,
also, just to piggyback, ESOP, Ethical Society of Police, for 2024 received a $150,000 grant for the pre academy from the state of Missouri. And now we just applied for $250,000 from the state, not our local government, from the state. And that's getting in there and changing policy. And I've actually had met with the director of public safety at a training, and I introduced myself and I said Ethical Society of Police, and it felt good because she said, "Oh, we know you guys up here as ESOP," which is, that means we're making an impact on the state level, that we're trying to do something and set a standard for the state of Missouri, that we're taking these funds and we're using it to educate, as Ray was saying, to educate and inform our community.
man, this has been a great conversation, you all. And you know, me personally, somebody threw in there and said, what about a part two? And I think we might have a conversation about bringing this back, and because I think there's some things that we yet to still uncover, and so, but this has been a great conversation. And as always, I am so thankful for everyone that joined us. But before we close out, I got to ask you all to give a final thought. And I'm going to shape this question, right? I want you to give your final thought. But before you do, because this is no more hiding, right? And that's the purpose of this organization, is to, we want to engage, we want to educate, and we want to empower our community. So I want you to frame your final thought, starting with, what does no more hiding mean to you in relationship to the work that you're doing. Right. And so we're going to do a reverse order this time. Sarge, we're going to have you go first. What does no more hiding mean to you? And give us that final thought, something that we can go home to and think about.
Okay, I'm going to start it off with approaching the mental aspect of the profession and the mental aspect as it pertains to our urban community and Black people. It's okay not to be okay. It's okay to express that you're not feeling okay mentally. And no more hiding means that, to me, is that one, I never did hide. So now it's okay that I can forge forward and push down those barriers for those who may be hiding. If you need to hide, get behind me because I'm going to push forward.
Man, thank you, thank you. That's and LT, talk to us.
I have two, and I know we're running out of time, but I'm glad Donnie touched a little bit on the mental health part, right? And for those of us that are Black in this profession, obviously anyone in law enforcement or a first responder has the potential of having some or encountering some traumatic or critical incident that will leave some residual post traumatic stress. But couple that with being Black in this profession, there are racial traumas that we are unable to deal with openly, of dealing with a career that seeks to marginalize our voices, our community, and also target us when we speak truth to power. So, in terms of the mental aspect, it's okay to join or to be a partner or seek partnership with those who shared your life experiences, because you it's difficult for you to hold those things on your shoulders alone, and it's easy to be targeted as an individual versus being a collective group with shared life experiences and shared issues that you want to see addressed, because sometimes it comes down to a life or death situation. And so in terms of that, um, embrace who you are, the community that you are centered or should be centered in, and then seek to have a coalition of those who are friends, loved ones, colleagues who share your ideals, political ideology, and your desire to do the right thing when you put on this uniform and badge. Um, the other aspect of the no more hiding is that you don't have to be in a specific position or title position of power or leadership to be a leader, right? Every throughout history, every movement, started with one person that was courageous enough to say it's enough. We talked about, Chief Troy Doyle in Ferguson, who was courageous enough to say it's enough,
Hmm.
right? And so that made others, that quiet majority who have seen the irrationalities play out, that have made our communities less safe because we are afraid to call things out that are detrimental to our communities and those that seek to prey on us, for what it is. And so no more hiding is about no longer sitting back watching things play out at the detriment to our community and to us as people.
Man, once again, I have to say this has been just an awesome dialogue today, and I'm so thankful, for just you all being here and sharing this platform, and I do believe that we're going to have to come back with a part two. As we come to a close of tonight's episode, I want to express my heartfelt gratitude to Lieutenant Ray Rice and Sergeant Donnie Walters for their candor, insight, and unwavering commitment to both the community and their profession. Fellas, your willingness to confront these challenges, issues head on, they continue to embody what we mean in the spirit of no more hiding. Tonight, we've delved into some complex realities by Black officers as they work to address the systemic inequities from within law enforcement. We've explored the barriers to reform. We looked at crucial need for accountability on all levels and the vital role that the community plays to support is to the effecting of change within the communities that we live in. What's clear from our discussion is that the path forward requires courage, it requires us to be collaborative, and it requires a commitment to the uncomfortable conversations that we must have in order to make the change that we have to see. As Lieutenant Rice and Sergeant Walters have shown us, change is possible when we refuse to hide from the truth, right? And then instead, we want to confront it. We want to confront it with honesty. We want to confront it with determinations. To our listeners, we encourage you to reflect on what you heard tonight. Consider how you might contribute to the push for equality and equitable policing within our communities, whether it's through police engagement with law enforcement officers and being actively engaged with them, whether it's supporting organizations like the Ethical Society of Police, or simply continue to educate yourself and others around you about the actions that it takes in order to have positive change in our community. Remember, the conversation doesn't end here. We invite you to continue to dialogue in your homes, your workplaces, your communities. Share whatever you've learned. Challenge the preconceptions that black officers, right, are on one side or the other. We want you to keep pushing for changes. We want to see that happen in our lifetime. Once again, join us every first and third Thursday of the month at 8 p.m. Central Time, whatever station you're reaching us on, right? And we have these crucial conversations with No More Hiding podcasts, right? Until then, we want you to stay informed, stay engaged. Most importantly, we want you to stay committed to positive change because we know that it's our responsibility to engage, to educate, and to empower. As always, our manhood, our mission. Thank you.